beginning of Canada. I figure that if I read the beginning, then I don't have to do any of the blah, 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 which occasions reading something from the middle of a book in which you have to hear about who was who and things that put you to sleep. First, I'll tell about the robbery our parents committed, then about the murders, which happened later. The robbery is the more important part since it served to set my and my sister's lives on the courses they eventually followed. Nothing would make complete sense without that being told first. Our parents were the least likely two people in the world to rob a bank. They weren't strange people, not obviously criminals. No one would have thought they were destined to end up the way they did. They were just regular, although of course that kind of thinking became null and void the moment they did rob a bank. My father, Bev Parsons, was a country boy born in Marengo County, Alabama in 1923. He came out of high school in 1939, burning to be in the Army Air Corps, the branch that became the Air Force. He went in Demopolis, trained at Randolph near San Antonio, longed to be a fighter pilot, but lacked the aptitude and so learned bombardiering instead. He flew the B-25s, the light medium Mitchells that were seeing duty in the Philippines, and later over Osaka, where they rained destruction on the earth, both on the enemy and undeserving people alike. He was a tall, winning, smiling, handsome 6-footer. He barely fitted into his bombardier's compartment with a big, square, expectant face and knobby cheekbones and sensuous lips and long, attractive feminine eyelashes. He had white, shiny teeth and short black hair he was proud of, as he was of his name, Bev. Captain Bev Parsons. He never conceded that Beverly was a woman's name in most people's minds. It grew from Anglo-Saxon roots, he said. It's a common name in England. Vivian, Gwen, and Shirley are men's names there. No one confuses them with women. He was a non-stop talker, was open-minded for a Southerner, had graceful, obliging manners that should have taken him far in the Air Force, but didn't. His quick hazel eyes would search around any room he was in, finding someone to pay attention to him, my sister and me ordinarily. He told corny jokes in a Southern theatrical style, could do card tricks and magic tricks, could detach his thumb and replace it, make a handkerchief disappear and come back. He could play boogie-woogie piano and sometimes would talk Dixie to us, and sometimes like Amos and Andy. He lost some of his hearing by flying in the Mitchells and was sensitive about it, but he looked sharp in his honest GI haircut and blue captain's tunic, and generally conveyed a warmth that was genuine and made my twin sister and me love him. It was also probably the reason my mother had been attracted to him, though they couldn't have been more unsuited and different, and unluckily gotten pregnant from their one hasty encounter after meeting at a party honoring returned airmen near where he was retraining to learn supply officer duties at Fort Lewis in March 1945, when no one needed him to drop bombs anymore. They were married immediately when they found out. Her parents, who lived in Tacoma and were Jewish immigrants from Poland, didn't approve. They were educated mathematics professors and semi-professional musicians and popular concertizers in Poznan who escaped after 1918 and come to Washington State through Canada and became, of all things, school custodians. Being Jews meant little to them by then, or to our mother, just an old, exacting, constricted conception of life they were happy to put behind them in a land where there apparently were no Jews. But for their only daughter to marry a smiling, talkative, only son of Scotch-Irish, Alabama backwoods timber estimators was never in their thinking. And they soon put it out of their thinking altogether. And while from a distance it may seem that our parents were merely not made for one another, it was more true that when our mother married our father, it betokened a loss, and her life changed forever, and not in a good way, as she surely must have believed. My mother, Neva Camper, short for Geneva, was a tiny, intense, bespectacled woman with unruly brown hair, downy vestiges of which ran down her jawline. She had thick eyebrows and a shiny, thin-skinned forehead under which her veins were visible, and a pale, indoor complexion that made her appear fragile, which she wasn't. My father jokingly said people where he was from in Alabama called her hair Jew hair or immigrant hair, but he liked it and loved her. She never seemed to pay these words much attention. She had small, delicate hands whose nails she kept manicured and shined, and was vain about and gestured with absently. She owned a skeptical frame of mind, was an intent listener when we talked to her, and had a wit that could turn biting. She wore frameless glasses, read French poetry, often used terms like cauchemar or trou de cul, which my sister and I didn't understand. She wrote poems in brown ink, bought through the mail, and kept a journal we weren't permitted to read, and normally had a slightly nose-elevated, astigmatized expression of perplexity, which became true of her, and may always have been true. Before she married my father, and quickly had my sister and me, she graduated at 18 from Whitman College in Walla Walla, had worked in a bookstore, featured herself possibly as a bohemian and a poet, and had hoped someday to land a job as a studious small college instructor, married to someone different from who she did marry, conceivably a college professor, which would have given her the life she believed she was intended for. She was only 34 in 1960, the year these events occurred, but she already had serious lines beside her nose, which was small and pinkish at its tip, and her large, penetrating, gray-green eyes had dusky lids that made her seem foreign and slightly sad and dissatisfied, which she was. She possessed a pretty thin neck and a sudden, unexpected smile that showed off her small teeth and girlish, heart-shaped mouth, though it was a smile she rarely practiced except on my sister and me. We realized she was an unusual-looking person, dressed as she typically was in olive-colored slacks and baggy-sleeve cotton blouses and hempen cotton shoes. She must have sent away to the West Coast for us, since she couldn't buy such things in Great Falls. And she only seemed more unusual, standing reluctantly beside our tall, handsome, outgoing father, though it was rarely the case that we went out as a family or ate in restaurants so that we hardly noticed how they appeared in the world among strangers. To us, life in our house seemed normal. My sister and I could easily see why my mother would have been attracted to Bev Parsons, big plank-shouldered, talkative, funny, forever wanting to please anybody who came in range. But it was never completely obvious why he would take an interest in her, tiny, barely 5 feet, inward and shy, alienated, artistic, pretty only when she smiled, and witty only when she felt completely comfortable. He must have somehow just appreciated all that, sensed she had a subtler mind than his, but that he could please her, which made him happy. It was to his good credit that he looked beyond their physical differences to the heart of things human, which I admired, even if it wasn't in our mother to notice. Still, the odd union of their mismatched physical attributes always plays in my mind as part of the reason they ended up badly. They were no doubt simply wrong for each other and should never have married or done any of it, should have gone their separate ways after their first passionate encounter, no matter its outcome. The longer they stayed on, and the better they knew each other, the better she at least could see their mistake, and the more misguided their lives became. Like a long proof in mathematics, in which the first calculation is wrong, following which all other calculations move you further away from how things were when they made sense. A sociologist of those times, the beginning of the 60s, might say our parents were in the vanguard of an historical moment, were among the first who transgressed society's boundaries, embraced rebellion, believed in credos requiring ratification through self-destruction, but they weren't. They weren't reckless people in the vanguard of anything. They were, as I said, regular people, tricked by circumstance and bad instincts, along with bad luck, to venture outside the boundaries they knew to be right, and then found themselves unable to go back. Though I'll say this about my father. When he returned from the theater of war and from being the agent of whistling death out of the skies, it was 1945, the year my sister and I were born in Michigan at the Wurtsmith base in Oscoda. He may have been in the grip of some great unexpected gravity, as many GIs were. He spent the rest of his life wrestling with that gravity, puzzling to stay positive in the flow, making bad decisions that truly seemed good for a moment, but ultimately misunderstanding the world he returned home to, and having that misunderstanding become his life again. It must have been that way for millions of boys, although he would never have known it about himself.